Demos Quill had a few good questions for this mailbag. Asked, can Wendell Carter Jr. do another level up with Paolo Banchero on the team as the floor general? Statistically, WCJ's fourth year is almost identical to Sabonis' third year. Does he indeed step on his footsteps? They're both undersized, mobile bigs anyway. I never thought of Wendell Carter Jr. as undersized. I will say, Demos, that I did not realize how similar his numbers were to Sabonis's in his fourth season. I looked those up, and they're eerily similar. It's absurd. The thing I will say is I don't think he's going to follow in Sabonis' footsteps, just because when you go back and watch how he's accumulating some of these numbers, there feels like I don't know what the word is, but one, WCJ is not the passer that Sabonis is, because he's not asked to be. He's also not going to enjoy the same type of post-up volume. That was 12% of WCJ's plays last year, and he averaged, by the way, 1.21 points per possession in the post. And so he's a good passer. I think what I'm very interested in is I view him as having some more like outside in juice, where Sabonis is going to operate methodically in those situations. Even if you see him bring the ball up the court, WCJ just seems to operate faster there. And so that's not to say that he would be better, but I'm more interested in him as like this explosive decision maker, or even just, I like him more, think he can fit more alongside someone like Banchero and Jalen Suggs and anyone else like a Markelle Fultz who needs the ball or wants the ball in their hands on the Magic. You look at WCJ's screening and off-ball movement, that looked to get a lot better last year. I trust long-term Wendell Carter Jr.'s jump shots. He shot 38.5% on catch and shoot threes after the All-Star break. Maybe some noise in there when you look at some of the games that he played. What I'm most interested in seeing is how he deals with what will presumably be less attention, because also look at him when he catches the ball on the roll. Like, defenses were showing 2 or 3 bodies towards him more than you would expect. That can't happen if you have Banchero and Suggs is playing well and Franz Wagner's on the court. And so that extra space, I think, will allow him to put more pressure on the rim, since he was a little bit below average there when you're looking at his volume. Some of that had to do by design or by choice, just looking at some of his bailout options, little flip shots and touch a little bit further away from the basket. But I'm anxious to see if they run Banchero, WCJ pick and rolls, which they absolutely should, or even if they're not, if it's Fultz, Wendell Carter Jr. pick and rolls, or Suggs, Wendell Carter Jr. pick and rolls. The Magic, while I don't think that they're just like chock full of good shooters now, the roster is currently constructed with Banchero in the fold. They brought Mo Bamba back. Gary Harris comes back. Terrence Ross is still there for now. They have enough like surrounding shooters, Franz Wagner, of course, to where WCJ is going to have easier paths to get to the rim. And so I don't know if WCJ will be as central to what Orlando's doing offensively if you want to see him have the ball in his hands, but I don't think he needs to be that type of player to have an impact. And look, let's just call it what it is. There's a chance that Wendell Carter Jr. is still an all-star. He's young enough to where he can continue to improve. He just wrapped up his age 22 season. He was largely written off because of Chicago. And his passes mattered. They weren't like super complicated passes, but teammates shot almost 54% on their looks when they took a shot after a pass coming from him. And also there's more like, I want to say laterality, which probably isn't a word, to Wendell Carter Jr.'s offensive game if you put the ball in his hands. I think it was a game against the Dubs last year. He hit like this 2 or 3 dribble, escape dribble 3, and it was just glorious to watch. And so he's been a player I've been thinking about a lot of what is his ceiling. It feels undefined. Do I think he's ever going to be an all-NBA center? I'd probably bet against it. But if you told me that Wendell Carter Jr. was in the all-star discussion this season, I'm not going to be shocked. There's more mobility from him on defense than there is alongside or not alongside, but from Domas Sabonis as well. And I also like the fact that Sabonis can devastate as a playmaker from a standstill. And even just like if you're going to put the ball in his hands and tell him to try and get his way towards the basket, there's just more like jet fuel or pop to what Wendell Carter Jr. is doing. He might be best if he's catching the ball on the move, but like he can get going downhill off a standstill, like, and really get going. And so I view him as more complementary than Sabonis, which is not to say better, but I think easier to fit in inside this ecosystem where the Magic are going to want to feed plenty of other players. And quite frankly, when you look at Suggs and Banchero and even Fultz specifically, they're going to need to feed a bunch of other players. And so I just think this is all to say, I think Sabonis and Carter Jr., despite the statistical similarities, are just much different players by the avenues through which they got there. And so That's not a problem. I don't think that Wendell Carter Jr. needs to be the number one or number two option on the offensive end. This is someone who I think could just, within the complete flow of the offense, I don't want to say not having plays drawn up for him, but not having to toss the ball to him in the post or like from the high elbows or just like above, like beyond the arc and have him run these handoffs. I don't think he honestly needs that. He can get to 15 plus points like he did last season, maybe even flirt with 20 entirely within the flow of the offense. And I'm just, again, very intrigued to see what he might do with either, is he going to take more threes? 3.5 attempts per game is fine, but you want to see that number go up? Or does he just have even higher quality twos to take because of the extra space that should be around him? And his passing might improve from there too, because like I said, he did a really good job diming up cutters and even finding some shooters beyond the arc. And he will swing the ball very quickly as well. And so he's the type of player where you scale his game to a better version of the Magic, and you have to envision Wendell Carter Jr. actually being better. And so you want to see the three-point clip come up. I think getting the extra rim pressure will hopefully bring up his free throw volume. That's tough to do sometimes when the ball is not perpetually in your hands. Like I said, though, when he gets going and is going downhill hard, teams should be able to foul him. Needs to bring the free throw clip up, sub 70% last year for the season. Not great. Certainly a good enough rebounder to play the center position. So the question here, can Wendell Carter Jr. level up? Absolutely. And this is someone that I would watch as, look, if you want to pick Suggs, I would not pick rookies as part of this exercise. If you want to say that Wagner is going to do it, but if you're looking at a breakout candidate on the Orlando Magic relative to what happened last season, it's Wendell Carter Jr. feels like, no, he might not have the most runway to improve, but it might just be set up best for him to improve based off what we just saw last season. And so I'm not ruling out an all-star trajectory for Wendell Carter Jr. at this point. And frankly, you shouldn't either. I know players can sort of be considered what they are entering year 5, but like that's not always the case. If you told me that Wendell Carter Jr. was just worked his way into the discussion for most improved player, I'd be a little bit surprised unless the context of his game changed a ton. He probably deserved that buzz this past season that he didn't really generate when you look at who all the other candidates and the ultimate winner was. But I wouldn't write him off of that discussion. You tell me. There are just so many possibilities left for Wendell Carter Jr. And yes, I'll bet against all NBA because you need to be a top 3 center. Or I guess the way they fuck with positions now, you could be like a top 6 center technically and get it as a forward anyway. I don't know if he gets there, but this is someone who's really good. And that's why I think when there have been a lot of questions about would you rather have the Magic or the Pistons next season specifically, it's why I lean towards the Magic because they have a Wendell Carter Jr. in addition to, and Franz Wagner, but in addition to like having the Banchero and Suggs and how that applies to the Pistons having Cade Cunningham and Jaden Ivey, among others, obviously. Great question. But the Magic, look, they were already worth watching. I just think that there's still room for Wendell Carter Jr. to grow, even if, like I said, there's less centrality to the way that he's used on offense.